The coffee shop was unusually busy that morning, with customers rushing in and out, some annoyed by the long lines, others too engrossed in their phones to notice the world around them. Amid the chaos, a young barista named Emily stood behind the counter, her hands moving swiftly as she prepared orders. She had been working there for 2 years, always cheerful despite the low pay and long hours. The door chimed softly as Keanu Reeves walked in, dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans, looking every bit like an ordinary customer. Most people didn't even notice him, but Emily did. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't every day a Hollywood star showed up at their small-town coffee shop. She smiled warmly, masking her excitement, as he approached the counter. "What can I get you today?" she asked, her voice steady. Keanu glanced at the menu briefly before ordering a black coffee. As he reached for his wallet, Emily noticed the man behind him, an older customer in a worn-out jacket, fumbling with loose coins in his hands. He looked embarrassed, clearly counting every penny to afford his drink. Without hesitation, Keanu placed a $20 bill on the counter and said, "I'll cover his order too." The man looked up, startled. No, I couldn't let you do that," he stammered. But Keanu simply smiled. "It's just coffee. Don't worry about it." Emily was moved by the gesture. She handed over the man's coffee, her eyes meeting Keanu's for a brief moment. "That was kind of you," she said softly. As Keanu nodded and moved to the side, the shop's manager, Greg, stormed out of the back room. He was a tall, imposing man with a permanent scowl. His voice boomed across the shop. "Emily, what are you doing? We don't give away free drinks here." Emily blinked, confused. "It wasn't free. He paid for it." Greg's glare didn't waver. "That's not the point. You don't decide how we run things here." He pointed at the older customer, who was now hurriedly leaving. "This is a business, not a charity. Next time, let them pay for themselves." Emily's cheeks flushed with anger. It was his money. He chose to help. Greg's face darkened further. "Enough. You're done here." The room fell silent. Everyone, including Keanu, froze. Emily's heart sank as the words hit her. She had just been fired for allowing someone to show kindness. Keanu stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "You're letting her go because I chose to pay for someone's coffee." Greg sneered. "Stay out of this. She's my employee, not yours." Keanu stared at him for a moment, then simply nodded. "All right." He looked back at Emily and said, "I'm sorry." Emily watched as he walked out, leaving her stunned and humiliated. She gathered her belongings and left the shop, tears welling up in her eyes. That night, as she sat on her small couch in her cramped apartment, her phone buzzed. She ignored it at first, but the calls kept coming. Finally, she picked up. "Emily," a man's voice said on the other end. "This is Marcus Lane, Keanu Reeves' manager. He told me what happened today. Are you free to talk?" Her breath caught in her throat. Emily sat up straight, clutching the phone as if it might vanish. Yes, I'm free," she stammered, her heart pounding. Marcus's tone was warm, almost apologetic. "Keanu told me everything about what happened at the coffee shop. He was deeply impressed by your courage to stand up for what was right, even if it cost you your job. He doesn't forget people like you, Emily." She couldn't find the words to respond. The events of the day had left her emotionally drained, but now, hope stirred within her. "I didn't do anything special," she finally managed. "You did more than you realize," Marcus said. "Keanu wants to meet with you tomorrow. He has an idea he'd like to discuss. Can you come to the Grand Meridian Hotel at 10 a.m.? Emily's mind raced. The Grand Meridian. That was the fanciest hotel in town. What could he possibly want from her? Still, she knew this wasn't an opportunity to turn down. "Yes, I'll be there," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. The next morning, Emily arrived at the hotel, her modest dress and secondhand shoes making her feel out of place among the opulent marble floors and chandeliers. She hesitated before approaching the front desk, where a staff member greeted her with a polite smile. "Miss Emily," the woman asked. "Mr. Reeves is expecting you. Right this way." Emily followed her, anxiety building with every step. She was led to a private lounge where Keanu sat, casually dressed yet radiating an effortless charisma. He stood as she entered, offering a warm smile. "Emily," he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. She shook his hand, still unsure of what to say. Thank you for inviting me, she replied softly. Keanu gestured for her to sit. I've been thinking a lot about what happened yesterday. It reminded me of how easy it is for people to forget the importance of kindness. He leaned forward, his gaze sincere. I want to do something about it, and I think you can help. Emily blinked, surprised. Me? How could I help? He smiled. You already have. Your courage inspired me. I'm starting a new initiative, a foundation focused on acts of kindness and support for those who are struggling. I want you to be a part of it. We'll start small, helping people in need, one story at a time. But I believe it can grow into something much bigger. Her mouth fell open. You want me to work with you. Why? Because you understand what it means to care, even when it's hard, he said simply. People like you can make a real difference. Emily's mind was reeling. Just yesterday, she'd lost her job, humiliated in front of a crowd. Now, she was sitting across from one of the most famous men in the world, being offered a chance to change lives. Before she could respond, Keanu continued, there's one more thing. I know you're worried about finances after losing your job. Consider this your first step forward. He slid an envelope across the table. Emily hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling. Inside was a check with more zeros than she'd ever seen in her life. She gasped, looking up at him with wide eyes. I don't want charity, she whispered, her voice breaking. Keanu shook his head. It's not charity. It's a chance for you to do something meaningful. All I ask is that you use it wisely, for yourself and for others. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she realized her life had just changed in ways she never could have imagined. But as she sat there, overwhelmed with gratitude, a question lingered in her mind. Why her? And what was Keanu's real reason for involving her in something so big? As Emily left the hotel with the envelope tucked tightly in her bag, a swirl of emotions consumed her. Gratitude, disbelief, and curiosity battled for dominance. Why had Keanu chosen her, out of everyone? What could he possibly see in a small-town barista who had just lost her job? The questions kept her awake that night. Her modest apartment, with its peeling wallpaper and creaky furniture, felt even smaller now, a stark contrast to the grandeur she had experienced at the hotel. She stared at the check for hours, wondering if this was real. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Lane. Hi, Emily. Keanu asked me to arrange a small meeting for you today. We'll be visiting a community shelter he supports. Can you meet us there at 2 p.m.? Emily's fingers hovered over the screen. She had never been to a shelter before, but something told her this was important. She replied with a simple, yes, I'll be there. At exactly 2 p.m., Emily arrived at the shelter. It was a humble building with faded paint, but the warmth inside was undeniable. Children laughed in a corner, while volunteers served meals with smiles that could light up the room. Keanu was already there, kneeling beside a little boy who clung to a stuffed bear missing an ear. When he spotted Emily, he waved her over. Glad you could make it, he said, his voice as calm and inviting as ever. Emily nodded, feeling a little out of place but determined to understand why she was here. This place is amazing, she said, looking around. It is, Keanu agreed. But it's also struggling. Donations have been low, and they might have to shut down soon. Emily frowned. That's terrible. These people clearly depend on this place. Keanu stood, his expression thoughtful. That's why I wanted to bring you here. I've been supporting shelters like this for years, but I'm one person. What I'm trying to build with you is bigger than just writing checks. I want people to connect with stories like this, real stories that inspire them to act. Emily felt a spark of understanding. You want to use stories to show people why kindness matters. Exactly, he said with a smile. And that's where you come in. I've seen how you stand up for what's right, even when it's not easy. I think you can help me tell these stories, real, human stories that make people feel something. Before Emily could respond, a commotion erupted near the shelter's entrance. A middle-aged woman, her face pale and anxious, rushed inside with a small girl clutching her hand. Please, the woman begged the volunteers. I just need a place for the night. My daughter hasn't eaten since yesterday. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to the shelter's manager, a kind but overworked man named Tom. He sighed deeply. "We're at full capacity. I'm so sorry, but we can't take anyone else right now." The woman's shoulders sagged, and the little girl tightened her grip on her mother's hand, her white eyes brimming with tears. Keanu stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Tom, let me cover their stay somewhere safe tonight. And tomorrow, we'll figure out a way to make sure this never happens again." Tom hesitated, then nodded. "All right, thank you, Mr. Reeves." Emily watched the scene unfold, her heart aching for the woman and her child. As Keanu escorted them to a quiet corner to talk, Emily realized something. This wasn't just about telling stories or donating money. This was about changing lives, one act of kindness at a time. But as she stood there, a sense of unease crept in. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Keanu's plan, something he wasn't telling her. And whatever it was, she was now deeply entangled in it. The drive back from the shelter was quiet, but Emily's thoughts were anything but. She sat in the passenger seat of a sleek black car, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the stitching on the leather seat. Keanu was driving, his focus on the road, his face unreadable. Finally, she broke the silence. "Keanu, why me? Why go out of your way to involve someone like me in all this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned onto a quieter street lined with trees, their bare branches swaying in the wind. After a moment, he sighed. "Because I see myself in you," he said, his voice softer than before. Emily frowned, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Years ago, before anyone knew my name, I was just a guy trying to get by. I worked odd jobs, lived paycheck to paycheck, and felt invisible most of the time. But, every now and then, someone would show me kindness, usually when I least expected it. It's those moments that stayed with me, that reminded me of the kind of person I wanted to be. When I saw you yesterday, standing up for what was right, I remembered what that felt like." Emily stared at him, caught off guard by his honesty. She'd seen his movies, read the headlines about his generosity, but this was different. This wasn't a celebrity talking. This was a human being sharing something deeply personal. "I still don't know if I'm the right person for this," she admitted. Keanu smiled faintly. "You are. You just don't see it yet." They pulled into the driveway of a modest building, a two-story office with large glass windows and a small, unassuming sign that read, "The Kindness Collective." "What's this?" Emily asked, stepping out of the car. "This," Keanu said as he joined her, "is where it all starts." He led her inside, where Marcus was waiting along with a small team of people, each busy at their desks. The room buzzed with quiet energy, the walls adorned with photos and quotes about compassion, community, and change. Marcus greeted them with a nod. "Everything's set for the next step." Keanu turned to Emily. "I want you to work with this team to share stories that matter. Stories of people like the woman at the shelter, like the man at the coffee shop. Stories that inspire action." Emily nodded slowly, her nerves mixing with a growing sense of purpose. "I think I can do that." Keanu smiled. "Good. Because there's one more thing I need your help with." Before she could ask, Marcus handed her a folder. Inside were photos and documents about a struggling rural community, families living without access to clean water, kids walking miles to get to school. "These are real people," Keanu said. "And they need help. I want you to go there, talk to them, hear their stories. And then, together, we'll figure out how to make a difference." Emily felt the weight of the folder in her hands, both literally and figuratively. This wasn't just a job. This was a mission. But as she looked up at Keanu, she noticed something in his eyes, a flicker of sadness, almost guilt. It was fleeting, gone before she could fully process it, but it left her wondering. What was he hiding? And why did she feel like this was just the beginning of something much bigger than either of them had anticipated? Emily spent the night poring over the folder. Each photograph told a story of hardship, a mother collecting muddy water from a distant stream, children sitting on makeshift benches in a dilapidated school, a farmer standing in his barren field, staring at the cracked soil. She couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. This wasn't just about sharing stories, it was about changing lives on a scale she had never imagined. The next morning, Marcus called to confirm the details of her trip. "You'll be flying out with a small crew tomorrow. Keanu wanted this to be a hands-on experience for you. He'll join later once you've gathered the initial stories. Emily agreed, though a gnawing sense of unease lingered. Why wasn't Keanu coming with her immediately? What was holding him back? The flight to the remote village was uneventful, but as Emily stepped off the small plane, the stark reality of the situation hit her. The village was a cluster of ramshackle huts surrounded by dry, desolate land. Children ran barefoot, their laughter a stark contrast to their visibly malnourished frames. The air smelled of dust and despair, but the villagers greeted her with warm smiles, their resilience evident. As Emily started talking to the residents, their stories unraveled like threads of a larger tapestry. There was Maria, a young mother who walked 5 miles daily to fetch water. There was Elias, a teenager who dreamed of becoming a doctor but couldn't afford to finish school. And then there was Joseph, the village elder, who spoke of the fertile land they once had, now reduced to nothing due to corrupt government policies and unchecked industrial exploitation. Emily's heart broke with every story, but she also felt a growing determination. She recorded interviews, took photos, and scribbled notes feverishly. The villagers, though wary at first, began to open up as they saw her genuine interest in their lives. By the end of the day, Emily sat outside Joseph's hut, exhausted but fulfilled. She had enough material to create a compelling narrative, one that could draw attention to the plight of the village. But as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Joseph said something that sent a chill down her spine.
"You're the second one to come here asking questions," he said, his voice low. Emily frowned. "The second? Who else came here?" Joseph hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else could hear. "A man, a few weeks ago. He said he wanted to help too, but something about him didn't feel right. He asked strange questions, about the land, about the people's trust. Then he left, and we haven't seen him since." Emily's pulse quickened. "Did he say who he was?" Joseph shook his head, but he seemed important. Like he wasn't just here to help. He had an agenda. Emily tried to brush it off, but the unease from before returned with a vengeance. Who was this man, and why hadn't Keanu mentioned anyone else being involved in this village? That night, as Emily lay in the small cot provided by the villagers, her mind raced. Something about this whole project wasn't adding up. Keanu's secrecy, the mysterious visitor, the growing sense that she was part of something far more complex than she understood. And then, as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust. Not everything is what it seems." Emily sat up, her heart pounding. She stared at the screen, dread pooling in her stomach. Who was watching her, and what had she just stepped into? The next morning, Emily woke with a heavy sense of dread hanging over her. The mysterious message from the night before kept replaying in her mind, and despite the warm sun rising over the village, she felt an ominous chill she couldn't shake. She decided not to tell anyone about the text, at least not yet. The villagers welcomed her warmly again, offering tea and fresh bread as she resumed her interviews. But her focus was fractured. Every smile, every handshake, every word of gratitude felt like a reminder that something was amiss. By noon, Emily had gathered enough material to draft a story powerful enough to capture the world's attention. She sat under a tree with her notebook, recounting Maria's grueling walks for water, Elias's determination to study despite impossible odds, and the communal spirit of the villagers who shared what little they had. As she wrote, her phone buzzed again. She froze, staring at the screen. Another message from the unknown number. "The truth lies beneath the surface. Don't stop digging." Her stomach churned. The words were cryptic, but the implication was clear. There was more to this story than what she had been told. "Emily," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Marcus, who had just arrived from the city to check on her progress. His sudden appearance startled her, but she forced a smile. "Marcus, I wasn't expecting you," she said, tucking her phone away. "Keanu wanted me to check in and make sure everything's going smoothly," he said, glancing at her notebook. "It looks like you've been busy." Emily hesitated, then decided to test the waters. "Marcus, has anyone else from Keanu's team ever been here before me?" Marcus frowned slightly, as if caught off guard by the question. "Not that I know of." "Why do you ask?" She shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Joseph mentioned someone visiting a few weeks ago. I thought maybe it was related to the project." Marcus's expression tightened for a split second, but then he smiled. "Must have been a coincidence. We're the only ones working on this initiative. Emily nodded, but his reaction only deepened her suspicion. Something wasn't right. Later that evening, Emily decided to investigate. She approached Joseph discreetly, asking him to describe the man who had visited. He was tall, well-dressed, but not like you or the others, Joseph said, his voice cautious. He didn't ask about our struggles. He asked about the land, who owns it, how much it's worth. I didn't trust him. Emily's heart sank. Why would someone be interested in the land here? The villagers had nothing to offer, no resources to exploit, or so she thought. As she returned to her cot that night, Emily searched online for information about the region. What she found left her breathless. The land beneath the village was rumored to sit on an untapped reservoir of natural gas. Suddenly, the pieces started to fit together. The village's suffering wasn't just neglect or misfortune. Someone wanted them gone, and that someone had been here before her. But why hadn't Keanu told her this? Did he know, or was he just as unaware as she had been? Her phone buzzed again, and she hesitated before checking it. You're getting closer. Be careful, they're watching you. Emily's blood ran cold. She glanced around her small room, suddenly feeling exposed. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, and every creak of the wooden walls sounded like footsteps. She didn't sleep that night, her mind racing with questions. Who was sending the messages? Was Keanu truly the man she believed him to be, or was he part of something darker? One thing was certain, she couldn't leave this village until she uncovered the full truth. And whatever it was bigger than anything she had imagined. Emily returned to the city with her notes, videos, and a growing sense of unease. The villagers had trusted her, shared their pain, and unknowingly revealed the cracks in the facade surrounding Keanu's project. She couldn't look at him the same way without demanding answers. She didn't have to wait long. Keanu called her the next morning and invited her to his penthouse for a debrief. The invitation felt more like a summons, but Emily agreed, steeling herself for the confrontation. The penthouse was luxurious but understated, a reflection of Keanu's public persona, wealth without arrogance. He greeted her with his usual warmth, offering tea before gesturing for her to sit. How was the village? He asked, his tone genuine. Emily hesitated, gauging his expression. Eye-opening, she said carefully. They're incredible people, but they're facing challenges no one should have to endure. Keanu nodded, leaning forward. That's why I wanted you there. To see it firsthand, to bring their stories to life. So, what did you think of the project? Emily took a deep breath. I think it's complicated. I think there's more going on than you've told me. His brow furrowed, but he said nothing, prompting her to continue. Someone visited the village before me. They weren't there to help, they were asking about the land. And I did some digging. The village sits on a massive reservoir of natural gas. That can't be a coincidence. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. For a moment, he looked older, wearier, as if the weight of the world had suddenly pressed down on him. I didn't want you to know, he admitted quietly. Not yet. Emily's stomach dropped. So you knew? He nodded. I found out after I started supporting the village. The natural gas makes them a target, and there are powerful people who would do anything to drive them out. I've been trying to protect them, to buy enough time to secure their land rights, but it's not simple. The people involved in this, they don't play fair. Emily stared at him, torn between anger and understanding. Why didn't you tell me? You let me walk in blind, not knowing what I was stepping into. Because I needed you to see them as people, not as a cause, Keanu said, his voice steady. If I told you everything up front, it would have colored your perspective. And honestly, he hesitated, his gaze dropping. I didn't want to put you in danger. Emily's breath caught. Danger? From who? The same people who sent those messages, Keanu said grimly. They've been watching me for months. They know I'm trying to block their plans, and now they know about you. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. So what happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. Now, we fight, but we do it smart. Your stories can shine a light on what's happening. If the world knows the truth, it'll be harder for them to act in the shadows. But you need to be sure, Emily. Once you step into this, there's no turning back. Emily's heart pounded, but she didn't look away. The villagers' faces flashed in her mind, Maria, Elias, Joseph. She thought of the messages, the lies, the risks. And then she thought of the possibility of change, of justice. I'm in, she said firmly. Keanu smiled, the weight in his eyes lifting just slightly. Good, because this story is only beginning. As Emily left the penthouse that night, she knew her life would never be the same. The twists and turns she had uncovered were just the start of a battle far bigger than herself. But for the first time, she felt ready. Ready to face the unknown. Ready to fight for what was right. Ready to stand beside Keanu in a fight that would test everything she believed in.